Microsoft Teams.
Okay, well, we're recording now anyway, so.
Okay, that would be awesome. Yep.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, I'll put the microphone down and then we'll introduce you in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Can you see my screen shared?
Yeah, no worries. We can see your screen.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and welcome to our next plenary speaker. Hatam, who is a fourth-year PhD student and focuses on specifically the research of syntax and semantics in sign language, and he will be giving a presentation on Homesign, how an Iranian family created sign language. So hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Well, first off, thank you for this opportunity. I am very honored and privileged to be here. I have attended some of the meetings here, both the preliminary, plenary talks the last 2 days, and some of the presentations in this conference, and I really like them. I was I was surprised by the quality of the presentations in this conference, and I was really, really happy. Okay, so the title is ST Homesign. I think it was on the website. I think it was Homesign or in the program. ST stands for Sadat Tuahar, which is a small town that I'll show you like pictures of. And basically what I'm going to tell you today is basically really just a story. And I'll tell you a story because people like stories. Okay, so let's see what happened. So I'm going to give you an introduction about home science, and then I'll move on to the methodology that we followed in doing these projects. And then I'll report on the findings and conclusions. And I say projects because really what I did for this plenary talk is I put together the projects that I did starting in 2019 when I started working with Professor Ronnie Wilbur at Purdue University, and then up to now, actually. We've done like 5-6 projects on different subjects, different areas in sign language, specifically this home sign, and I will move on to define what a home sign is shortly. I put them together and I thought maybe I could share the findings that we have as of now and give you a bigger picture of what the grammar of this home sign looks like. So to summarize everything, we know that a spoken language that surrounds a sign language influences the development of that sign language. And there's a ton of research that has shown this. So the main leading research question here that motivated all of these projects is this. Does this home sign that we are referring to as ST home sign, does it have a grammar of its own? Or is it simply really a copy of Arabic, which is the spoken language? And our findings show that the grammar of ST home sign is not the grammar of Arabic. It only partially matches the grammar of Arabic, which is something you find in all languages. If you compare English and Arabic, which are totally unrelated, you're going to find some matching there, but that doesn't mean that English and Arabic are related, right? Or it doesn't mean that Arabic has influenced English or English has influenced the grammar of Arabic. It might have, but simply finding that similarity doesn't mean that. And we conclude that ST home sign has a grammar of its own, has developed its grammar. So now I want to throw some terminology here. So in sign language research, when we refer to, when we speak of manual markers, we mean using your hands when you're signing. And when we talk about non-manual markers, we are talking about using anything but your hands. And that mostly means using your body, like moving your body to the right, to the left, facial expressions, mostly raising your eyebrows, lowering your eyebrows, furrowing your eyebrows, which is a little different from lowering your eyebrows, eye gaze, puffed cheeks, and so many other facial expressions, nose wrinkles, also so many facial expressions. So all of these together, we refer to non-manual markers as non-manual markers. Also, Arabic is, when I say Arabic in this presentation, I mean Mesopotamian Arabic, which is the dialect of Arabic that is spoken in my hometown back there in Iran. And when I say Arabic, I mean Mesopotamian Arabic. Of course, Arabic is really an umbrella term, and there is so many dialects of Arabic. So manual markers using your hands, non-manual markers using facial expressions, and Arabic, I mean Mesopotamian Arabic. So spoken languages or language influence the development of a sign language, and this influence can be very strong sometimes. And there is a lot of research that has shown this. English, so for instance, or one example is Nice 2007. She reported on Edinburgh sign language, which is used in it's a village sign language. It's used in a village by because there is a high rate of deafness in that village. It's an Akan village in Ghana. And she reported on the influence as manifested in two things: word order and loan translations that are borrowed from Akan, which is the language spoken there. This influence is so strong that she refers to Edinburgh language as sign-supported Akan. So basically, the question here we have is the home sign that we have is sign-supported Arabic, right? Is it Arabic signed? But there's also this common misunderstanding that sign languages are simply representations of the spoken languages that surround them. So you won't believe how many people have asked me if ASL is simply English signed. And we do know for a fact that ASL, American Sign Language, for instance, is not English at all. They're completely different. But a lot of people, there's this misunderstanding that you just simply copy the spoken language and you just sign it, and there you go, that you have a sign language. Now, what is a home sign? A home sign is a gestural communication system that develops among deaf kids, kids who are born deaf. And these kids, there are two features of home signs. These kids, number one, they don't learn, they don't grow up learning a spoken language. And the second feature is that they are not exposed to a sign language either. So neither sign language nor spoken language. So what ends up happening is that they develop their own language, and it develops as a sign, as a home sign. We refer to it as a home sign. It's a very small language used by for basic needs among deaf kids. They use it to basically meet their basic language needs, and then it can develop into a fully developed sign language. That is possible. And we have home signs are always out there. We've found them in Australia and Bangladesh, anywhere in the world. And the features are interesting. They are evolved over only a single generation. So they're only 30, 40 years old. They are used by a very limited number of people, sometimes only a few kids. But since their parents might join them as well and their friends, the community might become larger. But the interesting thing is that they have systematic phonology and syntax and morphology, and they do display language-like behavior, although they're not fully developed languages. Now, so two main features. The kid is born deaf, doesn't learn a spoken language, and is not exposed to a sign language either. This is not exactly what happened with my father. You see his picture on the right. That's my niece sitting next to him. She is 17 right now. And she would accompany my dad wherever he went. So just to give you some background, my father was born hearing until the age of probably 20 something, he became deaf. He suddenly lost his hearing completely. He had not gone to school, so he didn't have any reading or writing literacy. And he didn't know sign language either. The people in that hometown, which is called Sadat Tuahar, they didn't know any sign language either. So they couldn't write to him to communicate with him. They couldn't use sign language with him to communicate with him because they didn't know sign language. He could speak normally, totally fine, but they couldn't talk to him. He couldn't hear them. So, and it's a small town, 400 people in southwestern Iran. So they tried to communicate with him. And his immediate family, I assume, because I wasn't born at the time. So this happened 55 to 60 years ago. So the people who tried to communicate with him, I assume, were my mother and his brothers and sisters who lived with him at the time. They tried to communicate with him. So they had only one option: to gesture to him. Now, if you think of, I don't know if you can see my picture actually right now, but we use this sign for go, and this sign for sit, and this sign for eat. So after 55, 60 years, now we have a sign language that my family uses with him. I should say used with him. And his close friends also can sign to him. Not everybody in that hometown. A lot of people come to us to translate for them. Also, the pictures you see, you can guess that it's a farmland. We have a farm, big farm, and most of the people there do farming. So what can you do if you use this Homesign? Well, you can do a lot of things. You can form simple sentences. You can combine them and form complex sentences. You can form questions. So you see there is the design feature of productivity here. You can talk about hypothetical situations as well. You can tell jokes and stories and lies, and you can use conditional sentences, which are an example of hypothetical situations. So this is really the design feature of displacement. You can also talk about past, current, or future events, which means that this Homesign does have tense, and we have ways to talk about tense. You can also negate a sentence, and I'll show you all of these. You can also make a sentence and insert that sentence inside another sentence and make a relative clause, and that's a really interesting feature, which animals are not able to do any of these, right? So you see that this Homesign, although it's very young, 50, 60 years, has features that you can see in only human language. Now, so the research question was, is ST Homesign simply Arabic signed following the grammar of the surrounding language, which is Arabic? Or it has developed its own grammar. And what did we do? So we had Arabic sentences that were signed by one native signer. And by native signer, I mean a person who grew up using this Homesign. So not a person who learned it later, person who learned it from birth. And that's what, so that native signer is me. And this is really not an ideal way of doing research. The researcher being the participant is not the ideal way, but in this case we had to, because I don't really have access, and I'll tell you what the problem is. So we use the Arabic sentences. They were signed by a native signer, and then these all of these signing was given to another signer, another native signer who was my nephew, and I asked him for grammaticality judgments of those sentences. And these are research projects from 2019 to 2022. We used the software Elan to annotate the data, and we looked at 7 different areas. We looked at word order in declarative sentences, topicalization, yes/no questions, WH questions, negation, and conditional clauses, and relative clauses. And you can see that out of these 7 areas, 5 of them are different when we compare Arabic and ST Homesign. That's a high percentage of difference, right? Now, we simplified everything here. I have simplified everything because I really just want to go directly to the point. But the main 2 takeaways that I really hope to convince you of this presentation is this. The first one is that ST Homesign is not the same as Arabic. And the second one is that ST Homesign is similar, surprisingly similar to fully developed sign languages. And I'll talk about both of these takeaways. Now, for declarative sentences, we used only simple active declaratives. And this is basically how we do research on word order. Normally, what you should do is you should only look at simple, active, pragmatically neutral sentences. So a very simple example, she milked the cows, he حلبت الويش, is SVO. Arabic allows other word orders as well, but SVO is normally what we stick to in my dialect. And that's exactly what you see in ST Homesign as well. That's the pragmatically neutral way of signing a simple active sentence. So we didn't look at passive sentences. We didn't look at pragmatically different sentences. We simply looked at simple active, and that's what we get SVO. So comparing these 2, we see that Arabic and ST Homesign are different, are the same, sorry. Now, another way to use a sentence, and we do this in probably many languages, if not in all languages, is by using topicalization, and we do this. Now, one way to do this is using topicalization. So in topicalization, you topicalize an element in the sentence, and that element can be a preposition phrase and a noun phrase or a verb phrase or anything really, to establish that expression or that element as the sentence topic. So example 1, you can see Mary spotted a tall man at the party. The tall man. So she's talking here. We're talking about the tall man at the party. So the tall man she found interesting, and this probably the reason is because we want to distinguish between the tall man and probably another man. And you see that there is a gap indicated here by T for trace, and this I for index. Now in Arabic, you can do exactly the same thing, except that in Arabic, you have a resumptive pronoun that you have to use. So in English, back to example 1, if you say the tall man, she found him interesting, that would be ungrammatical because English normally doesn't allow resumptive pronouns. But Arabic requires them. So in Arabic, if you said the tall man she found, that would be ungrammatical. So you have to say that the tall man she found him interesting. You can see in examples 2 and 3, example 2 has a resumptive pronoun, الكتاب, the book, أنا اشتريت. اشتريت, that is him because Arabic has gender, so the book is masculine, him referring to the book. The book, as if you're saying the book, I bought it. If you drop that resumptive pronoun, you'll get an ungrammatical sentence. So in example 3. Things get interesting here when we compare this with ST Homesign, because in ST Homesign, we don't require, resumptive pronouns are not required with plain verbs. And by plain verbs, I'll give you another example with a verb that is not a plain verb. So plain verb is the opposite of an agreement verb or an agreeing verb. A plain verb is simply a verb that you sign on your body. An agreeing verb is normally a verb that moves from the subject to the object. So I don't know if you can see my picture, but phone, for example, call in ASL is an example of an agreeing verb. So plain verbs here are buy and eat, and you see that the topicalized element is just there. So book, I, buy. By the way, IX means index, means IX1 means I. In sign language research, IX2 means you, IX3 means he or she or they. So the book I bought, the apple he ate, and the topicalized element is always marked with brow raise. You can see that very clearly, right? Now, if you compare these examples with this example, where we have the verb see, you see that there is the man you saw, and then there is pointing back to the man, right? The man is at the beginning of the sentence, and then there is 3 ways to indicate that I'm referring back to the man by using my index, using my eye gaze, and also my body. I'm looking on my right, right? And that shows that there is a resumptive pronoun present there. And you don't see this in these examples you see, I'm not referring back to the book. In example 2, I'm not referring back to the apple. That's because plain verbs don't require a resumptive pronoun, but agreeing verbs do. So in this case, Arabic and ST Homesign are both similar and different at the same time. Also, this example is not a topicalization example. This is an example of a relative clause, but that's not the point. The point is that in the case of agreeing verbs, you get a resumptive pronoun. Okay, so when we compare them, we see that with plain verbs, they are different, but Arabic and ST Homesign are the same. They follow the same strategies when it comes to agreeing verbs because both require resumptive pronouns. So let's move on to yes/no questions. So in yes/no questions in Arabic, you simply raise your voice, and that's how you get a yes/no question. In Mesopotamian Arabic, so هو يشتغل حيل, he works hard. If you raise your intonation and say هو يشتغل حيل, especially towards the end of the sentence, you get a question. Does he work hard every day? Now, so you don't add anything, and we don't really have anything, no question particles or question markers or anything to add. Standard Arabic does. We have a or hal, but we don't use them in my dialect of Arabic and a lot of other Arabic dialects. So just raising your intonation. In ST Homesign, what we see is really interesting. In example 1a, you see that that's a declarative sentence. He works hard every day. And then in the yes/no question, you see my eyebrows are up across the whole clause, the whole sentence. And I said that Arabic. Here I say Arabic and ST raising your intonation. The only difference being is that in Arabic you use voice, so you raise your intonation. In signing you don't have voice, so you would have to raise something, and that intonation is equivalent to eyebrows here. And it's not only brow raise. You see that there is a forward head movement or head nod. There's eye gaze. There is the last sign. You should hold the last sign when you sign a yes/no question, because you want to indicate to the other person that, hey, I'm waiting for you to answer my question. But you don't hold that last sign in a declarative sentence. And I wish I had the video here, but I thought that the videos might take a while to load here and it might cause a headache. And the chin is also lowered. So you see that across the whole thing. The whole question, there's brow raise and other head facial expressions. Okay, so in that case there, we can say that Arabic and ST Homesign are similar. Now, when we compare WH questions, things get really interesting, and I'll tell you stuff like that. And most of these are fronted, just like English. So in example 1A, you see يحصدون الأسبوع الجاي, they harvest the week coming, the next week. And then when you make a WH question, you have يمتى, which replaces الأسبوع الجاي, next week, and then it gets fronted. So you get يمتى يحصدون, when will they harvest? And we don't have a verb here because Arabic is, sorry, we don't have a subject because Arabic is a pro-drop language. If you don't move the WH word, you get an ungrammatical sentence, as you can see in 1C. So we have multiple WH words and they all get fronted, almost all of them. When you look at ST Homesign, we have only one WH word, and more correctly, WH sign. And it's the sign that you see on the left, top left. You can sign it with both hands or with one hand. Normally we sign it with only one hand. That's the informal way of signing it. The interesting thing is this WH sign only appears sentence finally. It is always indicated with brow furrow, always marked with brow furrow. And the meaning, since there is only one WH sign, the meaning of this sign is inferred from the context. And really, we borrowed this from the hearing people in Sadat Tuahar. They use the same sign if they say, if they ask a WH question. Is this bizarre? Not really. This is what is called a general WH interrogative. And it has been found in Israeli Sign Language, Brazilian, Indo-Pakistani, and Turkish sign languages. So in all of these. So when we compare Arabic and ST Homesign, we get multiple WH words in Arabic, but only one WH sign in ST Homesign. WH words are fronted in Arabic. In ST Homesign, they're kept in C2, where they belong, or sentence finally, I should say. So they are very different, right? And you see the example, when will they harvest? They harvest, and then the WH sign, when. And interesting how this WH sign is similar to the WH sign for what in American Sign Language and to the one in Indo-Pakistani Sign Language. And look at how they are marked. They're marked by furrowing the eyebrows. So not only the marking, but also the hand shape of the WH sign as well. Now, the next area is negation. Negation, in the case of negation, most main verbs in Arabic are negated by using the bound morpheme prefix ma. So hiya hilbat al-way, she milked the cows. You can simply make it negative by using hiya ma hilbat al-way, she not milked the cows. And I say main verbs, most main verbs, because we have different ways of negating different types of verbs. But here what I tried to only stick to was main verbs, sentential negation. So negating a sentence. So not negating a noun phrase, not negating an adjective phrase, for instance, not negating a verbless sentence, which Arabic has, stuff like that, only negating a sentence with a main verb. And when you do this, when you look at ST Homesign, this is how we do it. We have this sign that you see on the left, where you move your hand upwards, and at the same time, you also move your head backwards. We call that backward head tilt. And if you remember, we have a manual negator here, which is the hand, and we have a non-manual negator, which is the backward head tilt. And it's interesting how similar it is to exactly the negation in Turkish Sign Language and Greek Sign Language. Another interesting thing is that it's post-verbal. So in Arabic, it's pre-verbal, the morpheme, but in this case, it is post-verbal. Also, notice how in Arabic, it's a prefix, it's a bound morpheme. But in ST Homesign, it's not a bound morpheme. You can use it on its own. It's a free morpheme. So, if you use this, actually, this morpheme to say no. But you can't use this morpheme to say no in Arabic. You have to use a different morpheme, which is la. So examples, she did not milk the cows. You see SVO order, and then we have not the negation. Example 2, I did not go to school. Also, how notice how the negation has different forms with different verbs. It's slightly different. So if you look at go and then negation, if you look at milk and then negation, it takes different form, and that's because it cliticizes into the verb to some extent, which is something that has been observed in so many sign languages as well. So when we compare these Arabic and ST Homesign, we see that in Arabic it's a pre-verbal bound morpheme ma, in ST Homesign it's a post-verbal free morpheme plus the backward head tilt. So they are very different. But this is only one aspect of negation. There are many other aspects that we did not look at for this presentation. Now let's look at conditional sentences. And so what is a conditional sentence? So conditionality is important because it's key to human thought and action. We use it in our in our verbal reasoning all the time. And apparently it exists in all languages. We use it because we want to hypothesize about alternative situations and scenarios. And this is the unique design feature of human language, which is displacement. Typical canonical form of a conditional sentence is 2 parts. Now, we have the conditional clause, which we also refer to as antecedent or premise or protasis. So, and we have the main clause, which is the result, consequent, or apodosis. So sometimes that main clause is marked with then in English. So if you study hard, you'll pass the test. The game will be canceled if it rains. And example 2, if you don't study hard, then you'll fail. Notice how you can play around the other way, and you can say, then you'll fail if you don't study hard. But you can say you'll fail if you don't study hard. And that means that there are restrictions in the use of then. So 2 parts, a conditional clause and a main clause. There are different types of conditionals. There are hypothetical conditionals. So for instance, if you don't study hard, you'll fail. There is a relevance conditional. So in the first example, if you don't study hard, you'll fail the test. If you study hard, you'll pass the test, right? In the second example, in the second type of conditional sentences, we have relevance conditionals, and these are also referred to as conditional speech acts. So if you're thirsty, there's a beer in the fridge. Doesn't mean that if you're not thirsty, there's no beer in the fridge, right? So that's only relevance. And counterfactual is for things that are the opposite of the reality now. So if you had attended the classes, you would have passed the test, means you did not attend the classes. So it's counterfactual. We only looked at the first type of conditional sentences because we wanted to keep things simple. So hypothetical conditions, conditionals. So if you study hard, you'll pass the test. 2 major findings in research in sign languages about conditionals are are as follows. The first one is that it's always the conditional clause that is marked with a non-manual marker. So a facial expression, and usually that facial expression is the brow raise. And the second major finding is that the default position of the conditional clause is normally the sentence initial position. And we don't really have a marker. Most sign languages don't have a lexical marker, a manual marker. Now ASL has if, it's using the pinky and put it in your cheek, or you can fingerspell IF for if. But this is not really an ASL thing. This is borrowed from English. Most people even don't like it. Most deaf Americans or most ASL users don't like this sign because it's borrowed from English. So in ASL, there's a wide number of non-manual markers that are used to indicate that a sentence is conditional. And these are usually head tilt and rotation of the head to the left and brow raise. So tomorrow rain, picnic canceled. So this means if it rains tomorrow, the picnic will be canceled. Now, if these non-manuals are absent, you get a different type of sentence. It's not a conditional anymore. If you didn't have any of these non-manual markers, you would get it will rain tomorrow and the picnic will be canceled. So that is an example of coordination, actually, not conditional. But when these non-manuals are present, you get a conditional sentence. In Arabic, we have two conditional markers, which mean if. The common one is low, and the not very common one is إذا. So low تمطر حيل, if it rains hard, الزرع يخضر تمام, the crops will grow well. The order can be switched, just like English. You can say الزرع يخضر تمام, the crops will grow well, low, or إذا تمطر حيل, if it rains well. So just like English, we're good to go. In ST Homesign, we don't have a sign that means if. And how do we indicate that a sentence is conditional or a clause is conditional? Well, we use brow raise and head thrust, but I'm going to focus on the brow raise. Also, there is a prosodic break. There is a pause in the form of a pause between the conditional clause and the result clause. And the reason we have this prosodic break, which has been observed in so many sign languages, is because we want to indicate the boundary between the two clauses. And you can see very clearly that there is no brow raise on the second clause, which is the result clause. Also, you can't mess with this order. You can't put the result clause first and then the conditional clause. That would be ungrammatical in ST Homesign. So only that order, the order of conditional clause followed by the result clause is allowed. So you see how different they are in Arabic. Arabic has conditional markers and the order is flexible. ST Homesign has no lexical markers, which mean if, and the order is inflexible, it's strict order. Two more examples. The kids fight, teacher will kick them out. If the kids fight, the teacher will kick them out. If you drive fast, you'll have an accident. You see how the brow raise, especially in example 2, because having an accident is a serious thing. So you see how the brow raise is so clear there, so salient. But in all of them, the order is the same and there's prosodic break between all of them. Now, is this unusual? Is it unusual that the conditional clause should always appear in sentence initial position? And the answer is probably not. Most people, when they think of ice cream melting, they first think of the ice cream getting warm and then. So it's natural for human beings to think of the order of the condition needing to be met before the result happening, right? So that's the order. That's the logical way of thinking about conditional clauses. And this is in line with Greenberg's 1963 Universal Number 14, which says in conditional sentences, the conditional clause precedes the conclusion. And that's the normal order in all languages. Okay, next one. This is the last one. Relative clauses. So what is a relative clause? It's a clause that modifies a noun, so it has an adjectival function. And that noun we refer to as the head or head noun. So in English, if you put the two sentences in example 2, the two sentences in example 2, the artist makes beautiful pottery, Laura admires him or her. If you put them together, you get a relative clause, which is the artist that Laura admires makes beautiful pottery. Now notice how there is a pause, there is a gap after the relative clause, and that gap is required in English. So in English, you cannot say the artist that Laura admires him or her makes beautiful pottery. That gap is not allowed in Arabic. In Arabic, a resounding pronoun is allowed, is required, in fact. And we have the relative pronoun illi. Now, in English, we have which, who, whom, right, and that. In Arabic, in my dialect of Arabic, we have only one relative pronoun, both in subject and object positions. It's illi. So, الأولاد اللي تعاركوا, the kids who fought, had a fight yesterday, تصاحبوا اليوم, made peace today. And when it's in object position, you get a resounding pronoun, which is required. So, الرجال اللي أنا سولفت وياه, is him. The man who I talked to him works here. So we have a relative pronoun, and we have resounding pronouns sometimes required when it's in object position. In sign languages, it's a little bit challenging to determine if a clause is a relative clause or not. And that's because we don't have relative pronouns normally in sign languages. So what do we do? If you look at example 1, there's recently dog chased cat, come home. It means the dog recently chased the cat and it came home. That's because of the absence of non-manual markers. So when there is no non-manual markers, we think that they are two sentences put together, coordinated actually. So coordinated by and in this case. If you put a non-manual marker, this example is, by the way, from ASL, American Sign Language. If you put a non-manual marker there on the first clause, which is normally brow raise, you get a relativized clause, so a relative clause. So the dog that recently chased the cat came home. But if they're absent, it's just coordination. This is exactly what we get in ST Homesign. There is no relative pronoun. And the relative clause, RC, relative clause is indicated with brow raise and, of course, other non-manual markers. But the main thing is brow raise here. So there is brow raise across the whole relative clause. And then there is a pause. That prosodic break shows that there is two clauses. So it indicates the clause boundary. And then there is the main clause where you don't see that brow raise at all. So relative clause, indicated by brow raise, and then prosodic break, and then there is a main clause. So here we have kid, fight yesterday, peace today. So this means that the kids who had a fight yesterday made peace today. Now what happens if you drop the brow raise on the first clause? Nothing crazy happens. What happens is the meaning changes, and we don't get a relative clause in this case. You would get a coordinated clauses. So you would get the kids had a fight yesterday, and they made peace today. But if you have a brow raise, you get a relative clause. One more example. Now, even when the head noun is in object position, it has to appear in the sentence initial position. So in English, you can say, I talked to the man who works here. So the man is in object position here. It's the object of the verb talk. In ST Homesign, and it's the same in Arabic. If you look at Arabic, I talk to the man who works here. In ST Homesign, you still have to put it at a sentence in the sentence initial position, although it's in object position. And that's a very interesting difference from Arabic. So last comparison, when you compare Arabic has relative pronouns, and the relative clauses are externally headed because the head is outside the relative clause. And the position of the relative clause depends on the role of the head noun. So it can be after it can be sentence initial or sentence final. In ST Homesign, there is no relative pronouns, and the relative clauses are internally headed because the brow raise also includes the head noun. And the position is always sentence initial. That's obligatory. So they are very different, right? And that's really the conclusion. we see some syntactic similarities between Arabic and ST Homesign, but we also see very considerable syntactic differences between Arabic and ST Homesign. So that's a really good piece of evidence that ST Homesign is not a copy of Arabic. It's not Arabic signed. So it's not Arabic supported sign, right? Or sign supported Arabic. And the second thing, the third thing that is very important, I think, is the remarkable similarities that you see between ST Homesign and other sign languages. And these similarities are reflected in 4 different areas as of now. The first thing is the use of non-manual markers for different syntactic structures. So we saw that in the case of raw raise with yes/no questions, with relative clauses, with conditional clauses, with WH questions. And the second thing is the hand shape similarities, the similarities in the case of the hand shape of some signs. So we saw this in the case of WH signs and negative signs. The third thing is that functional markers like if, conditional markers, or relative pronouns, these functional markers are absent from ST Homesign. And you see this, that these are absent from many, many other sign languages as well. And the last thing is that the order of the clauses is really interesting because it seems that ST Homesign adheres to the same order of clauses that other sign languages also adhere to. We saw this in the case of relative clauses. ASL, for instance, uses the same order. In the case of conditional clauses, many sign languages follow the same order, the majority actually. And then the last thing really I wanted to include is this. So whenever I tell people the story of my home sign and how my father became deaf and we use a home sign with him without ever learning a sign language, they always ask, so where did it come from? How did you come up with it? I can't really say we created this. It emerged naturally by signing. And if you attended the plenary talk yesterday, there was really good evidence about how sign languages emerge. So we know that the surrounding spoken language has for sure contributed to this, to the development of ST Homesign. We also know that the surrounding culture, that's where we got some signs. For example, the WH sign was borrowed from the surrounding culture. But I want to point out 3 main things that I believe are more important factors than the others. First one is the fact that sign languages are very iconic. So iconicity has played a very important role here. Now, I'm not going to go into details about any of these, but I believe probably there is universally shared body language, and that's why you see negative signs and WH signs are similar in many sign languages in the world. The last thing is that the discourse and pragmatic factors. So if you look at most sign languages in the world are either SOV or SVO. And that's probably because most people, when they think of a sentence, they probably think of a person doing something. So subject, verb, object really makes sense. Why would you put the verb first when you can simply put the person or the thing that does the action and then put the action or the verb and then put the object last? So that's the logical order. Which was probably, again, borrowed from Arabic. And spoken languages also adhere to SVO a lot. I think more than 45% of the languages in the world are SVO. So that's like almost half of the languages in the world. I think that's all I have for today. My father passed away in December last year, so less than 4 months ago. And I really dedicate this in his memory. He was a very nice guy, worked on the farm, and the day even he died, he was on the farm actually. So yeah, that's all I have for today. And if you have any questions, any comments, any critique, please don't hesitate to share with me. I would love to hear from you, and thank you for being here.
Now, if do people have any questions?
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. That's really fascinating. I have two sort of quick questions. Firstly, if you represent relative clauses and conditionals both using the brow raise, if I got that right, how do you tell the difference? And the sorry, the second question I have is, you mentioned at the beginning you sort of sent these to your nephew, was it, to sort of as grammaticality judgments to get those. What were the difficulties sort of surrounding that you sort of hinted at with getting sort of more maybe speaker input on the data? Thank you.
Thank you. Both of those are really good questions. And I was going actually in my presentation on conditional clauses that I had a presentation in a conference last month. I explained how that works, and it was nice to look at because I got feedback from the reviewers who asked me, okay, how would you tell the difference then? So in a yes/no question, you just ask the question. It's one clause, okay? In a conditional clause, the conditional clause is always followed by a main clause. That's one thing. And there is a prosodic break between the conditional clause and the main clause. Another difference is that in the case, the non-manual markers are not exactly the same. So the brow raise part is shared. So brow raise is both present in both conditional clauses and yes/no questions. But in the case of conditional clauses, there is no sign hold, last sign hold in the conditional clauses. But in the case of yes/no questions, there is last sign hold, which means like I'm waiting for you. So for instance, if I ask you, did you go to school? I say, went to school. And I keep my eyebrows raised, and I still keep the last sign. I hold it because I want to indicate that I'm waiting for you to answer my question. There is head thrust in the case of conditional clauses, but there is no head thrust in the case of yes/no questions. There is only forward head movement. But in the case of conditional clauses, there's head thrust. So for instance, if it rains and I drop my head kind of like down, head thrust, that's what we refer to as. I hope I answered the first question. Grammaticality judgment. Yeah, my nephew signs differently than I do. He is 27 years old. I am 33, and I think maybe age has created some difference too. My niece puts the negation before the verb. We all put it after the verb. My niece is only 16 years old, 17. So the 16, 17 years difference has created a difference between the age gap has created a difference in how she signs. Now, in the case of grammaticality judgment with my nephew, he agreed with some of them, but he didn't like some of them. So for instance, the head thrust, he was like, not sure what that means, or why you would do that. Or in the case of WH questions, he was okay with putting both the WH question in the beginning of the, or keeping it in C2, or moving it sentence finally. He was okay with both of them. But for me, keeping it in C2 is ungrammatical. So for instance, if I wanted to sign who left, I would sign person left who. But he would say who left. He was okay with that, although he was also okay with person left who. So those are some of the differences. But overall, we really pretty much agreed on 100% of the sentences that he thought that were correct. But he also had some other ways of signing them, which doesn't really surprise me.
Yeah, not at all. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We only have 5 minutes left, but if anyone has a last question, yeah.
This might be a bit of a random question, but did he still speak even in his last years, or did he mostly just sign? And he was 20 when he lost his hearing, so you must have grown up being part of the progress of this sign language.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. He never signed. He didn't need to. He always spoke. He never signed. I could tell that he could do some lip reading after, after being deaf for 50, 60 years, you become used to some signs, and you can tell what the other person is.
Yeah, we can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
No, sorry, we can't hear you. Maybe try without the headset through the.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I swear I didn't do anything. Okay. Well, yeah, he never signed, but he could lip read to some extent. So a lot of times we just sign like half of the sentence and we say something, and he would understand us. His vocabulary was old. So for instance, he would call a room. In my dialect, these days we say dar, which means room. He would say hira, which is a very old word. Nobody says that. He would call a bowl gashia. We would call it tasa. They're very different words. But the vocabulary of our home sign has developed over time. So 20 years ago, we had sickles, which we used for harvesting. And that sign became the sign for crops. Now, the vocabulary has changed and we use this because we have machinery, we have the combine, right? So we use this for harvesting. And then this has developed even more to the point where when we do this, we mean crops when we still are not harvesting. But when we do this, we mean the crops at the time we're harvesting them. So it keeps changing. We're not using this home sign anymore because he was the only deaf person. He passed away, so basically we're not really using it anymore. But hopefully my family will stay fluent in this home sign until I do my dissertation and in a year or so. So that, yeah. I hope they don't forget it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Well, now I can't hear you.
Yeah, we're going to do a book raffle now. So if you could just